In 1975, a CIA officer in Langley opened an envelope and simply stared at its contents for several minutes. Before him lay photographs of documents that, by all laws of the Soviet security system, should not have existed outside a specific safe in a specific building in Warsaw. These were the operational plans of the Warsaw Pact, nuclear strike diagrams, and logistics for an offensive on Western Europe. He flipped through photo after photo, realizing he held something his colleagues had spent years of work and sometimes their lives trying to obtain, and failed. The previous evening, a man in a gray coat walked past an old brick wall on a Warsaw street, slowed for a second and tucked a small bundle into a crack between the bricks. He didn't look back. He didn't stop. He continued walking at the pace of someone with nowhere to rush. The next morning, another man walked down the same street, slowed at the same wall, and retrieved the bundle. The man at the wall was Ryszard Kuklinski, a Polish colonel in the Soviet Bloc Army, an officer of the Polish General Staff, and one of the most knowledgeable individuals within the Warsaw Pact's military machine. He was also a CIA agent of 9 years who was never caught, and whom Reagan considered the most valuable and effective agent to work against the USSR. He managed to escape by ingenious means, outwitting Soviet counterintelligence. Prepare to hear a truly shocking story that will surprise you with its details. To understand how an officer with an impeccable career decided one morning to photograph state secrets and hide them in a city wall, we must return to Warsaw in 1930. Kuklinski came from a working-class family in a neighborhood where politics was not an abstraction, but the very scent of the street. Ryszard's father died in a German concentration camp. This is not just a biographical detail. It is a foundation. A boy who lost his father in a war started by 2 totalitarian regimes simultaneously grew up understanding that the state could be an enemy, that uniform and flag didn't necessarily mean justice, and that there was a difference between serving one's homeland and serving a system that usurped the right to speak on its behalf. After the war, Kuklinski chose the army. It was a logical choice for a bright young man from a modest family in a country where the military offered education, status, and a path upward. He studied diligently, advanced quickly, and demonstrated precisely the qualities the military system valued most: discipline, analytical thinking, and the ability to solve complex problems under uncertainty. By the 1960s, Kuklinski was a promising officer in the Polish army with a brilliant career and access to information known only to a select few. He also began to see what he wasn't supposed to see. The Polish army's position within the Warsaw Pact was diplomatically called Allied, but in essence it was colonial. Soviet advisors were present at every level of command. Operational plans were developed in Moscow and sent to Warsaw for execution. Polish generals could discuss details but couldn't change the substance. The substance was that in the event of war, Polish soldiers would be the first to die, at the vanguard of a Soviet offensive into Western Europe. Kuklinski saw these plans. He participated in their development. His analytical mind processed the numbers, maps, and logistical schemes, leading him to conclusions that official rhetoric carefully concealed. War, according to Soviet plans, meant the use of nuclear weapons on Polish territory, not abstractly somewhere in the West, but on Polish soil. Tactical nuclear strikes on enemy positions were marked on maps by Soviet strategists with the same detachment of bureaucrats stamps a document. In these plans, Poland was not an ally. It was a theater of war, a space that could be covered in radioactive ash for strategic goals formulated in Moscow by people who never lived in Warsaw. Kuklinski looked at these maps and thought about the people not marked on them. Polish cities turned into coordinates. Millions of citizens whose existence Soviet planners considered only insofar as it was necessary to calculate radii of destruction. This was the first crack. 1970 became a turning point, not because something specific happened to Kuklinski personally, but because something specific happened to Poland. The December events on the coast, shipyard workers in Gdansk and Gdynia, took to the streets to protest price increases. The authorities responded as Soviet systems always did to inconvenient questions from below, with troops and orders to shoot. Dozens of people died. Kuklinski knew how those orders were given. He was part of the system that carried them out. This knowledge differed from an abstract understanding that power can be cruel. It was concrete, operational, and personal. He saw the documents. He understood the mechanism. He was part of the mechanism. The second crack became deeper than the first. In 1972, during Warsaw Pact naval exercises in the Baltic, Kuklinski was part of the Polish delegation. The route included a stop in a Dutch port, a standard stop, nothing remarkable from an intelligence perspective. That's precisely why no one was paying close attention. Kuklinski used the short time in port. He approached an American warship docked nearby and requested a meeting with an officer. No prior contact, no intermediaries, no preparation on the American side. Just a Polish officer in civilian clothes, standing at the gangway of an American vessel saying, "I need to speak with someone from intelligence." The Americans reacted with caution, appropriate for a potential provocation, because that's exactly what it looked like. The Soviet bloc regularly sent agents with cover stories of disillusioned officers, a standard method for infiltrating double agents or discrediting genuine sources. Kuklinski understood this. He came with documents, not copies, originals. The CIA officer who made the initial contact later described that moment as one of the most tense of his career. Sitting before him was a man who could either be the greatest source of intelligence information in Cold War history or an expertly crafted trap by Soviet counterintelligence. Distinguishing one from the other in the first few minutes was impossible. Kuklinski spoke calmly. He explained his decision not in terms of money or Western ideology. He spoke of Poland. He stated that Soviet plans envisioned the destruction of his country in the first hours of a nuclear conflict, and that the Polish army in these plans was a shield deliberately exposed to attack to cover Soviet strategic reserves. He argued that the only way to protect Poland was to ensure the West knew the truth about Soviet intentions and was prepared to deter them. This was not a plea for asylum. It was a strategic concept. The CIA spent several weeks verifying the documents he brought. The results answered all questions about his motives and credibility. The documents were authentic, and the information they contained was of such a level that analysts in Langley could barely believe what was happening. The operation was codenamed Gull, then Symphony, then simply PL-1. Kuklinski appeared in CIA documents under the pseudonym Victor. Liaisons called him Colonel Jack. The next 9 years became the longest and most productive human intelligence operation of the entire Cold War. Kuklinski handed over more than 40,000 pages of secret documents to the American side. This figure is so vast it's hard to comprehend in human terms. 40,000 pages were not random intercepted papers. This was a systematic, methodical transfer of everything accessible to someone in his position. This included the Warsaw Pact's operational plans for war with NATO, detailed schemes for a Soviet offensive in Europe, specifying timelines, directions of attack, and units involved, plans for the use of tactical nuclear weapons, where, when, and in what quantity, technical specifications of the newest Soviet weapon systems, including data. American designers could not obtain by any other means the command and control structure of Soviet forces in Poland and personal profiles of top Warsaw Pact officers, their strengths, weaknesses, dependencies, and political views. CIA Director William Casey would later call Kuklinski a NATO officer in Polish uniform. This was not a metaphor. It was an accurate description of what he became. A man formerly serving one system was, in fact, serving its adversary. And he did so, not out of greed or fear, but out of conviction. However, conviction alone doesn't solve the problem of physically transferring secret documents from the Polish General Staff into the hands of American intelligence. This was a technical problem, and its solution required an ingenuity that seems incredible today, given the primitiveness of the available tools. Kuklinski photographed the documents himself. He used a tiny camera, a Soviet equivalent of a Minox, which the CIA replaced with better equipment after the first meetings. The filming took place in his office, at home, sometimes in a staff building's restroom, the only place an officer could be with documents without immediate questioning from colleagues. Each filming session was a separate act of mortal risk. Classified documents were not to be removed from specific premises. Kuklinski worked in a system where colleagues knew each other for years, where any deviation from routine behavior was noticed and remembered. He filmed quickly, methodically, without nervousness, because nervousness in a closed institution is as visible as a stain on a white shirt. The exposed films needed to be delivered. This was the second part of the problem, and in some ways, more complex than the filming itself. Direct meetings with CIA officers in Warsaw were impossible. Polish counterintelligence was professional and tracked foreign diplomats and officials with a density that precluded regular contact with local sources. Every American diplomat in Warsaw was under surveillance. Every contact he made with Polish citizens was recorded and analyzed. The CIA developed a dead-drop communication system for Kuklinski that became a model for subsequent operations. The dead drops were located in the most ordinary places in Warsaw: a crack in the wall of a specific building in the Mokotów district, a space behind a loose brick in an arch on Marszałkowska Street, an empty space under a bench in Łazienki Park, one of the largest city parks in the Polish capital, where the constant presence of strollers created natural cover for anyone bending down to tie a shoelace or pick up a dropped glove. Łazienki Park was used particularly actively. This was a clever solution for several reasons. The park is enormous, almost 76 hectares of palace and park complex in the very center of the city. People came there daily, in any weather, for various reasons. An officer strolling through Łazienki on a Sunday was absolutely invisible among hundreds of other walkers. The surveillance system could not track every person bending down to every bench in a 76-hectare park. The dead drop was activated by a signal system. A chalk mark of a specific color drawn on a specific spot on a particular surface meant drop made. Another sign in a different location meant dead drop empty, danger, operation suspended. This system was developed during World War II by European resistance networks and honed over decades of Cold War practice to the point where each element performed exactly one function with minimal risk. The American officer who retrieved the drop never met Kuklinski personally in Warsaw. They could be in the same park for an hour without exchanging a glance. One person would leave the films under a bench on Wednesday morning. The other would pick them up on Wednesday evening. They didn't know each other's faces. The system was built so that the failure of one link would not destroy the entire chain. But 9 years is a very long time for an intelligence operation in a country with developed counterintelligence. The security system gradually developed cracks, not through one crude mistake, but through the accumulation of minor circumstances, each of which meant nothing on its own, but together began to form a picture. The first suspicions in Polish military counterintelligence appeared, it seems, in 1980 or 1981. The exact date Polish archives never revealed. The source may have been a leak within the CIA itself. This is a painful detail of Kuklinski's story. The intelligence agency he served had its own security problems. Soviet intelligence had sources within the American intelligence community, and some operations known to too many people periodically surfaced in Moscow. Kuklinski didn't know how close Polish investigators were to him, but he felt a change in the atmosphere. It's hard to describe rationally. An officer who has lived 9 years in a state of constant double existence develops an almost physical sense of danger, a change in the tone of conversations, colleagues who ask slightly more specific questions than usual, glances that linger a second longer than they should, professional intuition. It saved his life. In October 1981, Kuklinski made emergency contact with the CIA, a danger signal. The situation was critical. Immediate evacuation was necessary. The CIA responded with the speed required by an operation of such magnitude. Kuklinski was not just a valuable source. He was, arguably, the most valuable agent ever to work for American intelligence during the Cold War. His loss, arrest, interrogation, possible disclosure of the volume of information transmitted, would have been a disaster not only for him personally but for the entire Western intelligence system in the region. An evacuation plan existed. The CIA always had evacuation plans for active sources of that level. The question was, in the details of execution, how to get a man out of Poland, a man who might already be under surveillance, without causing immediate alarm. The solution was both simple and audacious. Kuklinski was to leave Poland using documents that would not give counterintelligence an immediate reason for detention, but were not his own. Operations of this kind require a person who can be made invisible, not because he looks like someone specific, but because he looks like no one. The documents were prepared in advance. A passport in the name of an ordinary person, not a diplomat, not a military officer, not an official, a tourist, a citizen who had a reason to cross the border and no reason to attract the attention of a border officer at 5 in the morning when their shift was ending and they wanted to go home. The photograph in the passport matched Kuklinski's appearance sufficiently for border control not to raise questions during a quick glance. A quick glance. That was the calculation. Border guards look at thousands of faces per shift. Their attention is drawn by inconsistencies, nervousness, unusual behavior. A person who calmly presents documents, looks straight ahead, answers briefly and to the point, and has a clear reason for travel, passes. Kuklinski knew how to be calm. 9 years of daily double life surrounded by professional intelligence and counterintelligence officers either breaks a person or makes them absolutely composed. Kuklinski belonged to the latter category. The evacuation route was not direct. A direct route from Warsaw to the west through any official border crossing would have been too obvious. The CIA constructed a chain where each individual step seemed logical and mundane. No hurried packing, no unusual routes, no actions that in themselves could have raised questions. Along with Kuklinski, his family also left Poland. His wife, Gela, and 2 sons, Bogdan and Waldemar. This complicated the operation manifold. Technically, it's easier to evacuate one person than a family. But leaving the family behind meant leaving hostages in the hands of Polish counterintelligence. As soon as Kuklinski's disappearance was discovered, a matter of hours, his family would have been immediately arrested. That would have been a tool of pressure the Soviet bloc knew how to use. Therefore, the family left together. The details of the evacuation route are still partially classified. The CIA has not revealed the full operational scheme for reasons that remain relevant to this day. Methods that worked once can work again, and there's no point in publicly discussing them. It is known that the Kuklinski family crossed several borders before arriving in a Western European country under American protection. It is known that the operation took several days. It is known that at each stage, undercover CIA officers ensured the safety of their movement. When Polish military counterintelligence discovered Kuklinski's disappearance, which happened fairly quickly, because a military officer of that level cannot simply fail to show up for duty without an immediate system reaction, the family was already out of reach. In November 1981, Ryszard Kuklinski arrived in the United States. A few weeks after his evacuation, in December 1981, martial law was imposed in Poland. General Jaruzelski seized power. Solidarity was crushed. Thousands of people were arrested. Kuklinski later claimed he had warned the CIA about the impending martial law well in advance, that American intelligence knew about Jaruzelski's plans and could have warned the Polish opposition, but that this was not done for political reasons he could never accept. This was the final rupture, not with Poland, but with the illusion that intelligence work and political decisions exist in separate worlds. In Poland, an absentee military tribunal sentenced Kuklinski to death. The verdict was issued in 1984. The official charge was standard for the Soviet bloc: treason, espionage for foreign powers. Unofficially, the system punished him for making the system visible, for showing what the plans, publicly called the fraternal defense of the socialist camp, actually looked like. Life in the United States under a new name was not triumphant. This is an important detail that romantic versions of this story usually omit. Kuklinski lived under a witness protection program. A changed name, a changed city, limited contact with the outside world. The CIA provided basic security and financial support. But a man who had lived for over 40 years in one culture, one language, one city, does not transform into an American simply by changing his passport. The tragedy deepened in the 1990s. Both of Kuklinski's sons died under unexplained circumstances in the United States. Bogdan drowned in 1994. His body was found off the coast of Florida. Waldemar died in a car accident in 1995. Both cases were officially classified as accidents. Polish and American journalists covering the story pointed to the too close chronology and too convenient circumstances. Official confirmations of an elimination theory never appeared. Kuklinski outlived both his sons. In Poland, his reputation underwent a transformation that is itself a historical document. During the Polish People's Republic era, he was a traitor and a spy. After 1989, when the system he betrayed ceased to exist, the question of the nature of his actions reopened. Could serving against an occupying system that used the Polish army as cannon fodder in foreign strategic plans be considered treason? Was his loyalty to Poland any less than the loyalty of those who wore Soviet medals on Polish uniforms? A Polish court overturned his death sentence in 1997. In 2000, Kuklinski's Polish citizenship and military rank were restored. Official Poland decided to consider him a patriot. This decision was not unanimous. A part of Polish society found the rehabilitation painful. The arguments of his opponents were not without logic. An officer took an oath. An oath has no exceptions for cases where the system one pledges allegiance to turns out to be unjust. An army relies on discipline, not on individual moral assessments of orders. If every officer starts to independently decide which orders to follow, an army ceases to exist. Kuklinski never publicly polemicized with this position in harsh tones. In interviews he began to give after partially emerging from the shadows in the 1990s, he spoke calmly and consistently. He did not consider himself a traitor to Poland. He considered himself a man who chose between two forms of loyalty: loyalty to an institution and loyalty to the people that institution formally represented but actually betrayed. In 1998, he returned to Poland for the first time after 16 years of absence. The visit was short, private, and heavily guarded. The Warsaw he saw was a different city. Not because the streets had changed, but because the system had changed. The Poland he had worked against no longer existed. The army whose plans he photographed in staff-building restrooms no longer existed. Soviet advisors in the Polish general staff no longer existed. Kuklinski died in February 2004 in Tampa, Florida. The official cause was a stroke. He was 73 years old.